I think Elon's the representative for industry of tech at large, right? And as we've seen over the course of the last couple of months, I think he's come off, I don't know him personally, but I think he's come off like I think the technical term is asshole, and how he's run Twitter, right? And I think that that's had big implications for how people view the tech industry and the rich people in the world. And sure, that sentiment has always existed a little bit. I also think that like 10 years ago, we would have had, this would have played out much differently with Bill Gurley or someone like that, very prominent in their ability to sort of get people in line, at least to some extent, in terms of having a coherent message and communicating with or whatever people in DC about this stuff over the weekend, and all the different like more diplomatic approaches to at least having people kind of march or in the same direction with some of this stuff. And instead, what we had over the weekend was people tweeting in all caps and people like attacking, reporters for their reporting and all these different things. And I kind of get the feeling that there's a leadership void. I'll give like Hemant and my partner Satish a lot of credit for trying to pull a bunch of different people together and kind of move in the same direction. But there was a leadership void over the weekend, and a bunch of very prominent firms that you guys report on quite a bit were very, very silent in
Sequoia
their
and Andreessen in particular, I'd say. Like, Sequoia is supposed to run the Valley, and like, where have they been? They've just been like, feels like they're just like ducking the news cycle on this. I don't know, Dan, if you would agree with that.
I think they're ducking. I mean, I think so. Few thoughts. Like if we're talking 10 years ago, Sequoia. So that would have been Moritz at the time. He would have talked. He loves to talk. It would have been Bill Gurley who said benchmark. It would have been John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins, right? That would have been the group, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I also think, Elon is the kind of call it the avatar right now for tech, but he's the latest in a line, right? And look, and this is partially because when I say we, kind of the general public like bad stories, right? Go back to Uber and Travis. He was for a while. Zuckerberg before that, right? And most people know about Mark Zuckerberg is they saw the social network, and to them, that is Mark Zuckerberg, beginning, middle, and end. And there's no more to him than that. So like whether you want to call it bad actor or at least bad personality actor is kind of just Elon to me is the last in a series. He's the most public and in most real time, right? It's not that he's being fictionalized. He's kind of a supervillain in real life, but he's the latest in this. And, that takes a toll, I think, on the national psyche, and kind of just like, I think if you go back to 2008, I think a lot of people, or even before that, I think a lot of people's view of Wall Street was like Michael Douglas and Wall Street, right? And maybe even Michael Milken before that. Tech is that now, or VCs are that now for the general public who don't really follow this stuff on a day-to-day basis like we all do.
I mean, to really zoom out and agree with that totally, it's like the theme of the last Code conference was basically Silicon Valley never recovered from the death of Steve Jobs, right? Like Steve Jobs was a great standard bearer despite his flaws for what Silicon Valley wanted to represent. And, there have been people who stepped in over time, and Elon is certainly the loudest voice now. And I think the all-in crowd was able to be super loud. I think, I think my personal view is just, even though David Sachs is a super smart guy, like just the ideological contradiction and being very, I had an extremely viral tweet saying no atheists in a foxhole and no libertarians in a bank run. It just felt very directly contradictory with his ideology that he was cheering for this bank run. I would say, Gary Tan at Y Combinator struck a good message, and I think they were working hard behind the scenes and would like to see him continue to play more of a statesman role.
I think another thing, with Silicon Valley as an entity in general, one of the things that has become very clear is people look around and they look at like, what do I focus on? What is a large percentage of the equity value that's been delivered over the course of the last 5 years? Where has that come from? It's come from B2B software in large part, right? And there's been more and more VCs that have moved into doing B2B and doing stuff around software. And I don't know if, and so then you look at like what actually has driven change in people's lives. And for the most part, those things all happened over a decade ago, at least when those companies were founded. And so the average American looking around and saying, hey, how is my life different because of Silicon Valley? And sure, we can point to Zoom, or we can point to Moderna, or we can point to a bunch of other stuff at the edges. But the things that actually impact people's lives that they use every day, those things haven't changed. It's Uber and it's Airbnb and it's Instagram. And in some cases, people argue that it's actually not made their lives better. It's actually actually made society worse, certainly with regard to social media and those things. But now all the pushback on DoorDash workers and go ahead.
Not a winning message to be like toast was essential to your pandemic experience, New York dining. Like it was, but I don't think people don't
But
love
Moderna was. Moderna was. Like
right.
Moderna, and I think VCs did a shit job promoting the fact that Moderna was theirs. I mean, Moderna wasn't just like a couple guys in a garage and they pitched a VC. Moderna was literally created in the boardroom of a venture capital firm on a whiteboard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, down the street from me. That is a VC created and backed company. And arguably, I think it is probably, if you think about it, the most important company of the last 20 years, because there are a lot of companies that have made life better, some that have made life worse, impacted your life better. There are none that essentially saved society. Because if you even look at the Pfizer vaccine, it's based on mRNA technology that really Moderna kind of pioneered. So there's not a more important company in the last 20 years, and it's a VC created company, and VCs did a crap job. But can I add as a piece of that, the NVCA has done a lousy job. There is a trade group that represents venture capitalists. Where the hell were they last weekend? Where were they? I know there was a statement put out on Friday afternoon or something. They were silent. And if I was a VC who was paying dues, I would be livid.
I mean, like Lulu at Activision, who's running their comms and was at Substack Comms and has a great Substack, has been pushing, VCs and the tech community to just be much faster and more open in their communications, right? And I think the people who are willing to sort of tweet as it's happening get heard, and people who are looking to craft like an old school statement don't. And I think that's true both for groups like the NVCA and for Silicon Valley Bank itself, though they didn't really even put out new statements. But it's just, you need to communicate with people where the conversation is happening.
Is this just a natural maturation as an industry has gone from kind of this cottage thing to this institutionalized thing? And we have this generation of people that grew up in the world of SVB quite literally, in which they were friends with different people across different venture firms and all sort of worked together to split rounds and I guess in some cases nefariously collude. But is it that we haven't recognized that, hey, yes, MVCA exists, but is it something that we haven't recognized that like, hey, we need to be coordinated in this political way and have the message that we're all sort of singing from the same hymnal, and instead, because everyone's prolific tweeters and because there's all these individual personalities out there, people are just kind of shooting from the hip without a cohesive message, without saying the same things over and over again. And now that there's just this recognition that we actually need to talk from the same book, at least with the most important messages?
Maybe. I'll say, there's a few things that have changed, right? One thing that's changed is I think we all, when I say we, I'll say people like me and Eric and Logan, I think we kind of all used to know who the best investors were, not in a little niche, but like who were the two people who did Google, right? The real massive outsized ones that even if you were a very good venture capitalist, you're like, shit, I've never hit 5 grand slams in a game, right? There were a handful of those people. I don't think we know who those people are anymore. Like they exist, like, because it's all based on, there's one huge hit this year and then one huge hit next year. And they seem to be often different people who are backing them. And then plus you have the later stage funds. It used to be these companies would raise 3 rounds. It was obvious who the VC was who drove that thing. And it's changed now. I will say, though, in defense of venture capitalists and what they did, there were a lot of venture capitalists who spent their weekend, tweeting a bit, but really trying to work the phones in DC. There were because there was a perception. I had this sense, certainly over the weekend, talking to people in DC, that the Biden administration did not fully appreciate this in time or not early enough, what was about to potentially happen. Not just Silicon Valley Bank and kind of all the stuff that would happen with its companies, but the potential kind of national banking crisis that could have happened on Monday morning. And there was a lot of VCs who really, from talking to me, were saying, could you try to, they wanted their messages amplified, not to promote themselves or their companies, but to kind of shake Yellen, shake Joe Biden to say, there's shit happening here. Wake up.
I think we're talking about this in some ways like Silicon Valley failed, but in some ways, I mean, they had a massive success. They got the protections they want. And I don't quite get all the sort of pessimism on the timeline. Like this was happening on Friday and by Sunday they got what they wanted. Like that seems extremely fast in the political world to me. You had people like Ron Conway, I think it was reported maybe in Puck that he had like dinner with Obama and Kamala Harris, I believe, like around this time. I mean, I just had Lawrence Tosi on my podcast and he was calling Ro Khanna. It felt like every important person in Silicon Valley was on the phone with Ro Khanna while this was happening. And they got what they want. The deposits got covered. Obviously, the government could have moved before this, but a lot of people in Silicon Valley didn't see this coming until the week it was playing out.
Dan, to back up to your point though, on the who are the prominent venture capitalists, I do think there's a schism where 15 years ago we knew it was John Doerr and Mike Moritz, and there was success also led to notoriety, right? It was this symbiotic loop of who the best people were also the most prominent people. And now with Twitter and podcasts and whatever, like being successful no longer is being prominent. The names that people come up with aren't necessarily the names of who actually is a good investor, right?
True.
And who is actually respected in the industry. It's the people that are maybe the loudest on Twitter or whatever is the case. And I Eric, to your point, I agree that, listen, we got what we wanted. And there's a funny meme of Wario, and it says like, I won, but at what cost? I feel like that's sort of the way I feel right now about this. Is like, yes, we got what we wanted, but I think we burned so much political goodwill in getting there, right? And I think also there was a lot of long-term damage in terms of, I mean, I don't know, we can talk about the psychological impact of everything that happened and how it's going to manifest across the industry, across the economy and all of that. But I do think that there's definitely at least a perception that that what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and the way everything played out is going to have ramifications for things like Credit Suisse and things like First Republic and people's psychology across the industry. And so instead of being this little niche thing related to tech, because of how it all played out, because of the chaos, because of the uncertainty, people are going to look back at Silicon Valley and say, hey, these rich people made this happen. It's their fault. True or not?
By the way, there's a name we didn't mention here, which is Peter Thiel, who never says a damn word, yet somehow is considered the avatar for all of venture capital, right? You never, like, he's not on Twitter. He never says anything, but everyone blames him for or credits him for everything. By the way, Founders Fund, probably, like, if you want to say who really are some of the best investors in the Valley, that firm,
Oh, they're great.
Their returns are insane. Now I can't even remember what I was going to say. Yeah. Go on. I can't remember. I had something to say after that, but I can't remember what you were talking about now.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Thiel's a unique case, just in that, I think people are always looking for, puppet masters, and he's sort of branded as one. So then even if he touches something, it has sort of a super high narrative.
Dan, the point I was going to make, do you remember